This is a classic example of an album that I knew about, I had in my collection for a while, and I'm like, don't worry, I'm going to get to it. I'm going to get to it. And then I never do. And then a bunch of my contemporaries and a bunch of my pals are raving about this record and saying how amazing it is. And I'm like, ugh, I really should have grabbed onto that before the album came out. So kicking myself now, but hey, here we are. So let's dive into it.
After parting ways with the owl man, Bogd felt strangely satisfied.
The Story of Mr. Bogd by Ritual. So Ritual is one of those weird progressive rock outfits where they got their start in like the 90s and then put out a handful of records into the 2000s and then disappeared for a while. This is their 5th studio record. Their last album of the Hemulic Voluntary Band came out in 2007. We are 17 years after the fact, and even before that we had 3 records: Think Like a Mountain, Superb Birth, and their self-titled release. And so like it's almost like these guys are a completely different band, even though all the original members are prominent and here on it. So it's crazy that these 4 guys decided to jump back in. So we've got Patrick Lumsden on vocals and guitars, John Gables on keyboards, harmonium, harmonica, and vocals, Frederick Linsguff, oh boy, on bass, mandolin, and flutes, and then Johan Norden on drums and percussions. And Patrick, I think most of you will recognize from Kappa and their last album. So Patrick has been a little busy, and it's one of those things, like Patrick's voice on here is recognizable, but only if you look for it, because the first handful of listens to it, I thought this guy was just another great singer. I'm like, okay, he's channeling a lot of the symphonic retro prog. I get it. But it wasn't until I did a little bit of research and I realized that this is the same guy that sings a lot on Kappa, that I'm like, oh, I can hear that. Because on here, it's a little bit more gruff. It's a little bit more raw. There's a little bit more of a rocking atmosphere to it. And on Kappa, it's a little bit more refined. It's a little bit more polished in that sense, which I find very interesting, because the music on here is what I beg for in retro progressive rock. It's taking the styles and the ideas from the 70s progressive rock movement, but modernizing it and updating it and doing something completely different and something new. And I want more bands to do this. You know, don't just cut and paste. See the techniques, see the styles, interpret them, process it, make it your own, and do something different. And that is exactly what these guys are doing here on The Story of Mr. Bogd. I just feel as if they're taking the ideas from Yes, from Gentle Giant, from King Crimson, from Vandergraaf Generator, from Genesis, and they're using their own imagination, their own thinkers, do something completely different. And I absolutely love that. And you can see that right from the beginning of A Hasty Departure, where it sounds like some of the more crazier aspects from a Vandergraaf Generator, but they're utilizing these very symphonic stylings that you would get from a Yes or an Emerson, Lake and Palmer. It starts with such a burst of energy, and I think a lot of that has to do with Johan's drumming style. His work on the drums are just absolutely stellar. He's able to command this very complex and very mind bend of a rhythm section, and is able to not only make a what sounds like a 4/4 into something very interesting and very aggressive, but he's able to do it in a way that everybody can play very well around him as well. And overall, I feel as if they're taking all these different styles, but they're making it a little bit more folky in approach. You know, it's kind of what like Jethro Tull was doing kind of in the mid 70s, where they were having like Songs from the Wood and Heavy Horses, and trying this kind of a little bit more aggressive styling in a little bit more of a folky aspect. And this is definitely found within some of the more instrumental passages. There are 2 tracks on here that are purely instrumental: Dreams in Burham and Through the Rural Landscape, and both provide this soundscape of this journey, you know, and I feel that works really well with the overall concept of this record too. Because this is The Story of Mr. Bogd Part 1, it's a concept record. You know, we've got Part 1, and it is this kind of pilgrimage, this road trip, this wandering this magical landscape. It's almost like the Pilgrim story of this individual, of Mr. Bogd, as he's just going from scene to scene to scene to scene. Very similar to like Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, but the storytelling aspect of it reminds me of how Tohinder does it, specifically with I have little to no memories of these memories. And being quirky and being funny and having this large cast of rotating characters that will pop up for one song and then leaves. Like, it reminds me of some of the Portal fantasy that I would read in middle school, like Alice in Wonderland. You know, these little vignettes where they're collecting items. You know, on the Inn of the Haunted Owl, he collects a feather, you know, and it's like, you stroke this feather 3 times and I can be called upon your aid. Same with the Feline Companion, where it's like, ring this bell and the cat will come to lend your aid 3 times. So it's like collecting these things. There's a lot of setup that's being found on this record because it's part 1. And if I had to point my finger at any negatives about this record, it's that it is a setup. It's a setup record. It's part 1. So a lot of the things that they're setting up, they're not concluded. You know, there's a lot of things that I really love about this record, about the setups, but I don't feel as if we're getting any of the payoffs quite yet. So I feel as if my enjoyment of this record will be so much more when I actually get around to watch, or I guess listen to, part 2. And it's kind of making the sounds that we're not going to be getting it anytime immediately, which I'm like, I want to listen to it right now. That's the only drawback that I have to this record. Other than that, I think the music is outstanding. It's some of the best retro symphonic prog that I've heard in a very, very long time. And just the different characters that we have on here and how the musical themes reinforce that. You know, you've got the Chikakov Bogd being like this really fun kind of, you know, mirror of the character. You have Mr. Tilly and his gang. I already mentioned the owl and the cat. And I really love those kind of interplays of the character of Mr. Bogd and whatever character he's playing off of. And I really enjoy that kind of ebb and flow and they coming off of one another. And there's like so much whimsy and like darkness found on here. I mean, I already mentioned the opening track, but also the 5th track of Mr. Tilly and his gang. It has like this really off-putting, almost circus carnival flavor to it. That's just like, whoa. But that allows for a contrast when we're going through the Feline Companion, which still has this like playful darkness to it, but it's less grating and less like a funhouse of mirrors and more of like that, you know, friendly master of ceremonies that's like, I'm going to take you under my wing because you look a little bit out of your depth. And I also just love that build up and drive on this track. You know, within the Feline Companion, you've got this really loud and very bombastic styling. And I love when we get into that chorus and we've just got this really slow, like, like it's got this bop, it's got this groove, and it's very infectious and it's very inviting. You know, it's almost like this, again, it's that master of ceremonies. It's like, I'm going to take you under my wing and I'm going to help you out because once again, you look really out of your depth. This quirkiness is continued on with Read All About It, the 8th track, where we've got this groove. It has like this Deer Hunter flavor to it. You know, it's got like this modern stylings to it that I really, really appreciate. And I do like the 1-2 punch, the last 2 tracks of Forgotten Qualities and the 3 Heads of the Wall. It is a little bit of a short stop because, again, part 1, and I do wish that there was a little bit more of a finale on here, but these 2 tracks fill about 9+ minutes, almost into the 10-minute mark, that I really appreciate, and I almost wish that they made it as one track, as like kind of the bigger, I don't know, prog piece of this, because they do flow right into one another. Like, the Forgotten Qualities is about 6 minutes, and it's much more of a slow burn. You know, it's moody, it's atmospheric, it's not as quirky, but it's very emotive in that sense. And then the 3 Heads of the Wall is much more aggressive, it's much more immediate, it's kind of the only real piece that resolves within this movement, and it's more of a resolve of a to be continued. So yeah, in the end, the story of Mr. Bogd Part 1 was a real treat, and I really wish I listened to it sooner. You know, this is an absolute bop. You know, this is what I mean, where it's got quirky, very folky, very retro prog qualities that I have been begging the music industry for, and I cannot help but love it. So yeah, it's for that reason that I'll say The Story of Mr. Bogd Part 1 by Ritual is an album I absolutely love with my whole heart. Honestly, if I'm being real here, the only reason that this thing isn't a full-on masterpiece is because we don't have the completed product. Once I get part 2, maybe we'll have a full-on masterpiece on our hands, but as a standalone unit of music, I wanted just a little bit more resolution within the story. I wanted a little bit more resolution within the music. But as we have right here, it's one of the best prog pieces that we've received all year. So there you go. This one gets no seal of approval. This is one that absolutely run, don't walk to listen to. I have a feeling this one will go under the radar for a lot of people just because it's not put out by one of the big prog bands like Kappa, the Flower Kings, or Spock Spirit, or anything like that. But this is one that you don't want to sleep on. Run, don't walk to listen to this one. You'll be rewarded tenfold. So that's what I've got for the story of Mr. Bogd Part 1. What do you guys think about this record? Go and listen to it, and then come on back and tell me about it by commenting down below if you loved it or if you hated it. And that's where I'm going to leave it for you guys. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.